My mom put me up for adoption right after my dad passed away. Now, years later, she tracked me down online, but it wasn't for the reason I expected. I'm 17 now, and just recently, after a full decade of silence, my biological mother reached out to me. She had given me up for adoption when I was 7, and luckily, I found a family willing to take me in. For the sake of clarity, as I tell this story, I'll refer to my biological mother as Marina and my adoptive parents as Mom and Dad. Marina had me when she was about 20 years old. She had to drop out of college because of the pregnancy, but my biological father was able to finish his education. They got married right after he graduated. When I was 3, he was diagnosed with leukemia, and not long after my 7th birthday, he passed away. From what I understand now, Marina had already started the process of giving me up for adoption well before he died. The day after he passed, I was sent to live with my new family. The memory is still as vivid as if it happened yesterday, even though a decade has passed. I was heartbroken and confused, unable to understand what was happening around me. People kept telling me I'd be okay, that my father was in a better place, but all I wanted was to see him. He had been sick for a while, but he was always there when I needed him. When he passed, I wasn't even given the chance to say goodbye. Before I could fully grasp what was happening, my new family arrived. Marina told me they would be taking care of me for a few days, but those days turned into weeks, then months, and eventually years. I kept hoping she would come back for me. At first, I cried a lot, convinced my mother and my entire family had abandoned me. A few weeks after Mom and Dad took me in, my biological grandparents visited. They stayed in touch, but back then, I was too young to understand the full story. When I turned 14, my questions became impossible to avoid. I knew I was adopted, but I wanted to know why. I had clear memories of being happy with my birth parents when I was little, so I couldn't understand what had changed. Eventually, my grandparents, along with Mom and Dad, told me the truth. Marina had been devastated when my biological father was diagnosed with leukemia. But instead of standing by his side, she started an affair with my uncle. That was shocking enough, but what made it worse was that no one even knew about it until about 6 months before my father passed. By then, his condition had worsened significantly, and Marina and my uncle must have decided there was no longer a reason to hide their relationship. She had already made up her mind. As soon as my father was gone, she was going to be with my uncle. Marina and my uncle came clean to their parents, and my grandparents were appalled, but for the sake of my sick father, they kept their silence. I was too young to understand any of this at the time, and they didn't want my dad to find out because he was already dealing with so much. Around the same time they confessed their affair, Marina and my uncle also admitted they had no interest in raising me. They planned to put me up for adoption. There was a lot of backlash from the family, but Marina refused to change her mind. She said she had been too young when she had me, that she never wanted to be a mother, and only went through with it because of her parents' insistence. She claimed that without their pressure, she wouldn't have had me or married my father. Now that he was dying, she decided she didn't want me either. Since it would have been unthinkable to give me up while my father was still alive, they waited until he passed. The very next day, they handed me over to my adoptive parents. Mom and Dad were stunned when they learned about my situation. They had been wanting to adopt a child to complete their family, since they struggled to conceive a second time. It was too risky for Mom to try again. I think they originally had their hearts set on adopting a much younger child, but they never heard about me through an agency. Instead, one of Mom's cousins, who used to be friends with Marina, told her about me. When they found out what was happening, they knew they had to step in. My age didn't matter to them. They met with Marina in person, without involving any agencies. Since she had been struggling to find anyone willing to adopt a 7-year-old, she agreed almost immediately. My parents spoke to her 4 months before my father passed away, and just a couple of weeks before his death, everything was finalized. Even my adoptive parents assumed I would at least stay with Marina for a few days after my father died, but instead, she sent me away the very next day. When I finally learned the full story, I was relieved. I was grateful Marina had given me up, and even luckier to have found such amazing parents. Most people looking to adopt prefer younger children, but I found a family that truly wanted me. I love Mom, Dad, and my older brother more than anything, and I couldn't be happier. I also have 4 sets of grandparents who are part of my life, and that's something I never expected. Given the circumstances, you can probably guess that I was pretty spoiled growing up. After my dad passed away, no one in my family kept in touch with Marina or my uncle. They didn't even show up to his funeral, which my grandparents had arranged. I was there, of course. It was a heartbreaking time, and I was already struggling to understand everything that was happening. My grandparents thought it was best for me to focus on settling into my new life. When I finally learned the truth about why Marina had given me up and why she never remained a part of my life, I expected to feel unwanted or at least a little bitter. But honestly, I just felt relieved. I was grateful I hadn't grown up with her and that I had found my way to a family that actually wanted me. Now, at 17, I'm about to start college in a couple of months, and I rarely think about Marina or my uncle. But for the past few days, they've been on my mind non-stop because Marina suddenly reached out to me on Instagram. I have a public account, so I suppose it wasn't hard for her to find me. But I couldn't understand why she wanted to reconnect after all these years. Before agreeing to anything, I asked her straight out why she was reaching out now. She responded with a long, emotional message about how much time had passed and how she regretted giving me up. She admitted she had prioritized her life with my uncle over her responsibilities as a mother. Marina said she knew she had no right to demand anything from me, but she wanted me to know that she wasn't entirely in the wrong. She claimed the only mistake she had made was committing to too many things too young, not fully grasping the consequences. According to her, she had been under a lot of pressure, leading to many bad decisions, but she insisted she never regretted having me, no matter what my family had told me. She just wasn't ready to be a mother back then, and now she wanted to make things right. After thinking it over, I decided to meet her. I was curious, and against my better judgment, I wanted to hear what she had to say. I didn't tell my parents or grandparents. I just went ahead and met her. It didn't take long for me to realize that she wasn't reaching out to apologize or make amends, she needed something from me. I should have seen it coming, but I've always had a tendency to look for the good in people, even in someone like Marina. We met for lunch 2 days ago. At first, she was warm and friendly, eager to explain her side of things. She told me how her parents had pressured her into marrying my father, dropping out of college, and raising me, things she claimed she wasn't ready for. She said she felt trapped in her marriage, and my father's diagnosis was the final straw, which is why she turned to my uncle. She didn't regret the affair, insisting my uncle was the love of her life and that she had been happily married to him for the past 8 years. Then she started crying. That's when the real reason for this meeting came out. Her marriage was falling apart, and she wanted my help. She said she needed me to talk to both sets of my grandparents, hers and my father's, to convince them to reconcile with her and my uncle. When Marina had given me up for adoption without telling them, they had cut her off completely. For 10 years, they wanted nothing to do with either of them. My uncle had always been fine with that, but recently, he had started arguing with Marina because he wanted to reconnect with his parents. He knew they would never take him back after everything that had happened, and for some reason, he blamed Marina. He believed that if she had waited a bit longer before giving me up, things wouldn't have turned so sour between everyone. Now, their marriage was on the rocks, and Marina thought the only way to fix it was to get me to convince my grandparents to let them back into their lives. At that moment, I regretted meeting her more than anything. She wasn't there to apologize or take responsibility for what she had done. She only cared about her own problems. And she had the nerve to think I owed her something. I didn't hold back. I told her straight up that her crocodile tears weren't going to work on me. As I was about to leave, she tried one last time, saying that if I had been in her position, I would understand why she had made the choices she did. She insisted that she had been forced into motherhood when she wasn't ready and had still tried her best. Then she accused me of being brainwashed by my adoptive family, saying that if I couldn't see things from her perspective, then I was no better than the rest of them. That was the last straw. Marina had only been my mother for 6 years, and even then, she had all the help in the world. I knew for a fact that my grandparents had never forced her to drop out of college or to marry my father. They had only advised her to have me and see where life took her. She had twisted that advice into pressure, and if it came down to choosing who to believe, I would trust my grandparents over her any day. So I told her exactly what I thought. I told her to take her sob story somewhere else because I wasn't buying it. I had been willing to hear her out and maybe even give her a chance, but she had ruined that by trying to use me to fix her marriage. I owed her nothing, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into doing her dirty work. Since we had no real relationship, I didn't see Marina as my mother. She may have given birth to me, but it was my mom who had actually raised me. After saying that to her, I walked out of the restaurant and headed home. When I got back, I saw that she had sent me a voice message. It was just her, sobbing. I could tell from the background noise that she was still at the restaurant, which made me feel a little guilty. Crying like that in public must have meant she was truly devastated. In the voice note, she told me how hurtful it was for me to say that we had no relationship. No matter what had happened, she insisted, she was still my biological mother, and I was her flesh and blood. She said that regardless of everything, she still considered me her daughter. But I had no idea how to respond. The truth was, I simply didn't see her as my mother anymore, and I didn't feel like I needed to. She hadn't been a part of my life for the past 10 years. Still, something about the way she cried on that voice note made me feel conflicted. I haven't blocked her yet, even though I know I should. I don't want to feel guilty about this, but she's still a human being, someone who once had a connection with me. Edit, I thought I had made it clear, but just to clarify, I hadn't told my family that I went to meet Marina. I knew they wouldn't approve, which is exactly why I kept it to myself. I do owe them the truth, and I plan on telling them soon. But at the time, I wanted this to be my decision alone. If I had told them beforehand, they would have tried to stop me because they all despise Marina, and rightly so. I guess I just wanted some closure. I didn't expect much, but I wanted to talk to her one last time. Seeing her reach out brought up a lot of emotions, and I wasn't thinking straight. But I did go, and it's done now. Even if I could go back, I don't think I'd change my decision. Sometimes, you have to do what feels right for you, even if it turns out to be a mistake. At least I got the closure I needed. Update 1, I finally told my family about my meeting with Marina, and just as I expected, they weren't happy. I met with her last week, and a few days ago, I blocked her after she kept flooding my phone with texts and calls, demanding I talk to her again and give her another chance to explain. I didn't want to hear it. I met her, got my closure, and that was enough. It was clear to me that she wasn't reaching out to genuinely reconnect, she just needed my help. That's probably the only reason she reached out after all these years. After blocking her, I knew it was time to tell my family what had happened. I sat everyone down, my parents and all my grandparents, and explained everything. My parents were upset that I hadn't told them beforehand and that I had made such a big decision on my own. But even though they were disappointed, they understood. It was my grandparents who were really angry. They scolded me for a long time, and I listened because I knew I deserved it. They were mostly just worried that Marina might have tried to manipulate me or turn me against them, something they knew she was more than capable of. Once they had finished, I explained why I met with her. I told them I just wanted closure. I didn't expect them to fully understand, but it was something I needed to do for myself. The only thing I truly regretted was not telling them beforehand, and I promised never to keep anything like this from them again. That seemed to calm everyone down. Then, we started talking about the real reason Marina had contacted me, her marriage trouble and my uncle's desire to reconcile with his parents. All of us agreed that there was probably more to the situation than what she had told me. If she was this desperate to manipulate me into getting back into the family, it likely meant she and my uncle were in serious trouble. Marina had seemed extremely distressed both in person and on the phone, and my grandparents believed she was probably telling the truth about my uncle being angry with her. But regardless of the truth, none of us planned to get involved. My grandparents made it clear, Marina and my uncle stopped being family the day they got together while my father was still sick. The final straw was when Marina gave me away without even consulting them or allowing them to explain things to me. The only reason my grandparents are still in my life is because my adoptive parents had the kindness to let them remain part of it. So, long story short, Marina is blocked. No matter what happens next, I won't be speaking to her again. She's been sending me desperate messages, begging me to hear her out, saying her marriage and life are falling apart and that she needs me. But, honestly, what does she expect me to do? Even if I wanted to help, I couldn't. And I don't want to. Not anymore. I knew my grandparents wouldn't want to speak to Marina or my uncle again, and honestly, if I were in their place, I wouldn't want to either. It was completely fair for me to cut ties with her as well. I also knew she might try to reach out again by creating new accounts, but it wouldn't work. I had made up my mind if she tried to contact me again, I'd tell her I wasn't interested, and if she kept bothering me, I'd report her. I overheard my grandparents speculating about why my uncle would suddenly want to reconnect after all these years. Their guess? Financial trouble. Since no one in the family had been in touch with them, we had no idea what they had been up to. We knew they still lived in the same city, but beyond that, we had no clue about their lives. Marina had been a stay-at-home mom when I lived with her, but I had no idea if she worked now. If my grandparents were right and Marina and my uncle were only reaching out because they needed money, that would just confirm how truly awful they were. Reaching out to a daughter they abandoned a decade ago just to fix their financial problems? That was as low as it gets. If that was their real motive, I honestly hoped they got what they deserved. Update 2, Marina reached out again today. I had blocked her everywhere about 10 days ago, and after a week passed without hearing from her, I thought she had finally given up. But somehow, she found out where I go to school. That was a hard lesson for me. I needed to be more careful about sharing personal information online. When I was walking home from school, she suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It happened about a block away, and since I live close by, I usually just walk. She pulled up in her car and started yelling at me to get in. I refused, telling her I didn't trust her. I warned her that if she tried to force me or cause a scene, I'd start screaming right there in the middle of the street. That seemed to shut her up for a moment. She insisted she wasn't here to fight, she just wanted to talk. She said she didn't even care if I helped her reconcile with her parents, she just wanted to make things right with me. She admitted our last meeting had gone terribly wrong and wanted another chance. She even acknowledged that I'd likely think she was faking it, but she swore she was sincere. Her voice was desperate, but instead of feeling sorry for her, I just felt annoyed. I told her to leave me alone. That's when she completely snapped. I'm actually proud of myself for not falling for her act the first time around because she was good at pretending. But as soon as I made it clear I wanted nothing to do with her, she started cursing at me. She said she had tried to be polite, but if I was going to act like this, she'd make sure to ruin my life. She even threatened me, telling me I had better watch my back. Honestly, I just found it ridiculous. What was she even going to do? I kept walking while she ranted and raved, and eventually, she drove off after flipping me off. As soon as I got home, I told my parents. Once again, we had a family discussion about what to do. Since she had threatened me, we now had grounds for a restraining order. I was completely on board with that. I didn't want her to have any way of contacting me again. Update 3. A couple of days ago, my parents officially filed for a restraining order against Marina. Once she was served, my uncle suddenly decided to reach out to his parents exactly like my grandparents predicted. And, of course, it was about money. Apparently, Marina and my uncle had been running a confectionery business for the past few years, but it hadn't been doing well. They were desperate for financial help. Since they knew asking outright wouldn't work, they tried this whole elaborate scheme instead. But Marina lost patience with me, and her outburst ruined their plan. Who knows? Maybe this will even lead to their divorce, and I'd be more than happy if that happened. Now, my uncle is trying to suck up to my grandparents, pretending he had nothing to do with Marina's behavior. He keeps insisting that as their only son, he deserves their support. Marina, on the other hand, is going in the complete opposite direction. She's being as nasty as possible, trashing our family online, ranting about me and my grandparents, with zero concern for the consequences. Honestly, I hope she keeps it up because it's just making our case for the restraining order even stronger. We're pretty confident we'll get the restraining order approved because it's obvious she's unstable. I have no idea why she's even fighting it, considering she made it clear she wanted nothing to do with me. But in the end, it doesn't matter. I'll be leaving for college this fall, and given her financial struggles, I doubt she'll have the means to follow me. No matter what happens, my parents and family are by my side, so I know I have nothing to worry about.